I think a really important ingredient is knowing what you're good at and what you're not. And we don't know the answer to a lot of these questions, so we could just put it to the team and say, what are the unintended consequences of this decision? And have that out at the table. And literally it would be our old dinner table that we would have that chat and then make a measured call.
Well, Louise and Zane, it is so awesome to have you back. I can't believe it's actually been such a long time since we've caught up. I know that when we reached out to you to see if we could have a conversation about where your project was at, we all did a bit of a double take to see how long it had been since we chatted to you and to see how far you've progressed. So I know it's going to be an awesome update for those in the UA community. I'm wondering if before we begin chatting about your project in detail, can you just actually share with us, where is your project at? How have things sort of, in terms of the progress that you've made, what's going on with your project right now?
Great. Thanks, Amelia. Nice to catch up again. We have a site visit every Thursday, so it's feeling fresh because this morning we were out at the house and we're at internal lining stage. So lockup was a week and a half ago, and we had the frenzy of trades at our house with electricians and plumbers and security people, and we went there today and the plasterboard's all up. We've got this real sense of space within the house, and starting to look toward a week and a half and we get the beginnings of the shell of cabinetry. So it's starting to move from feeling, I guess, the skeleton of a home to starting to have a bit of a spatial feel to it, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know that point can be so exciting. It can still feel a little bit, I suppose, because the plasterboard obviously isn't white. It can feel, you can sort of then think, some spaces can feel a little bit darker than they'll be once they've got paint in them. And, there can still be a sort of a little bit of sense of clutter just because you can see obviously all the joins and it can feel a little bit, I suppose, untidy. But how are you feeling about the spaces? Like, how is it as you sort of look around and see, is it as you anticipated in terms of the light? We'll talk a bit more about obviously the design choices that you went through, but I can imagine walking on site this morning, that would have been pretty mind-blowing to sort of finally get that sense of those three-dimensional volumes that you're going to be living in and how it connects with the space around it and each other and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, for sure. I think the what you do get is all of your views. So that's really interesting. And site visits are in the morning, so we can see how the morning sun hits certain places. So we have a little bench seat outside a courtyard, like an internal courtyard within the house, and that just gets beautiful sun right at the time where you would want to sit there. So little moments like that you can already start to see happening, and naturally you can kind of look out and realize, okay, I'm glad we can still see that tree and we can still have this view line over a neighbour's house. So I think you're right, it's not a perfect white wall and it's patchy and it feels half-baked, which is what it is. But I think that it is really nice. At the moment we are living in a little apartment, and you just don't get the amount of natural light that we were hoping for in the house. And the back of our house has it's north facing rear, and we've got windows everywhere, and just the quality of the light compared to the apartment we're currently living in is really noticeable. So good early signs. But
yeah, one thing the plasterboard has allowed for is kind of the reveal. So when we've got a long hallway, as you walk in the front door, there's a hallway all the way down to where it really opens up into the kitchen and family living. And so prior to having the plasterboard in, you could kind of see the back from the front through all of the walls. But now that the plasterboard is in, you have to walk down the hallway, and then the big space with the backyard kind of reveals itself. So that's been a really lovely change, and kind of has brought that feel into the house that we really wanted, that we were really hoping for.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I've got goosebumps about it because I think that, getting that sense of all of the things and the intentions that you were setting up through the design phase and seeing that come to fruition, the excitement is just, it's palpable in terms of having that experience on site. So, and it never gets old. It really doesn't. So it's for that sense of transition into the home and that sense of expansion, particularly with a renovation of a home, where you do get to obviously recreate those sense of open plan spaces that are quite, obviously not necessarily the experience of the existing home that you had. You get that, lovely indoor-outdoor connection. And as you said, really making the most of the orientation and that north-facing rear. To see all of that come to fruition is really exciting. So now, when we caught up last time, you were still in the design stage, and so you've obviously moved through resolving design. You've been getting all your approvals. You've been, finalised all your documentation, your selections, all of your contracts, all of those kinds of things. Can you just talk through a bit of a timeline about how that progressed from where you were last time we chatted to kind of now being at an internal lining stage?
Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
I think probably as we look back, we started slow, and I feel like the pace then picked up, and we've had a really great cadence ever since. And what I mean by that is, I guess there are some parties you can't control, and one of them would be the banks. And I think that was just something that, as much as it's not a naivety because we've been through it before, but you go through this sort of pre-approval and conditional approval, and then you finally get to the point where you've got plans that are agreed upon. And that process itself was a really collaborative one, and actually a really enjoyable one, because we had our builder at the table with our architect, and it was about trade-offs, and it was about how do we want to live. And I actually feel like we got to that plan in a really organic way, but one that we were really happy with. I think you then turn to the bank and say, okay, we're ready. And they don't necessarily jump when you say go. So that created some delay for us early on. And I guess that's when, you can start to feel a sense of panic, because you think, well, we've actually factored a rental and a build timeline and all of this on being able to proceed at a certain time. We managed to get through that stage, as you do. You panic at the time, but it does pass. And once we had that, I think we've just hit a really nice rhythm. The communication's really transparent. We have a really strong sense of the schedule, and if anything, it's a double-edged sword, because you love when you've got that pace and that momentum within your build, but the downside of that is you fly through stage gates and you receive bills for those stage gates. So I think the challenging part, we've been so happy with the way it's progressed, and we haven't had major delays beyond that first contract phase, is that just there's a whole cash flow game that you need to play, because you've got the contract, but then you've got owner to provide, and we want to be a good teammate. So the moment we get that call to say, well, now's the time that this item needs to be on site and available, then you've got to pay for it. And it's just that ability to try and manage nearly 3 mental wallets when you're thinking about provisional sums and prime costs, and it's not a world we deal in every day. So I think that just takes a mental load of saying, okay, well, how do we make sure we've got the cash flow to be able to deliver at the right times? It all comes back to communication, but it's been good. I wouldn't say we've hit within the build team itself any delays we couldn't overcome.
What date was it that you signed the building contract? Do you remember roughly what month it was in terms of when and sort of construction start?
It was, I think it was about end of May. Does that sound right, Zane?
It does, yeah.
End of May, and then we handed over the house to the builders end of June. So it was about a month in between. But within that, but before we signed the building contract, we thought we were 90% there with the bank. Like we'd given them all of the documentation they'd asked for, and so we thought that was going to be a really quick and easy process, but ended up just having delays, and it was really due to the bank's busyness and people going on leave and all of the things that were kind of out of our control. So it's just a frustrating time.
Yeah.
Mm.
And did you find that you had any challenges with approvals or finalising your documentation or anything like that? Did that all go quite smoothly in the lead up to all of the contract signing?
Yeah, and that was, a major part of that was our architect just being amazing and on the ball. He was getting advice and keeping keeping the communication really open with all of the various people that provided all of the what are they called, the permits and all of those kinds of things. So that was kind of an iterative process throughout kind of those end month stages of finalising the design. So no serious holdups there. I guess the only the back and forth towards the end of the design phase was whether we build the entire thing with so the house and then the pool. We were tossing up on whether to kind of take the pressure off ourselves and build the house first, and then once the house was finished, go to stage 2, which would be the pool and the garage. And initially we decided, no, we're just gonna build it all together. And then when we got the final sum for the contract, we're like, actually, we might take a bit of pressure off ourselves, and because we assumed that whatever that contract sum was going to say, that would increase through the build, and we had to make that assumption, and so we didn't want to be completely stressed about money throughout the build stage. We wanted to kind of enjoy it and have a bit of flexibility with, adding things on if we wanted to, or, unexpected costs. So we decided to take the pool out, take the garage out, and that's now stage 2. So we're hoping that as we get closer to this finalising the house, that we'll be able to either press go immediately on the pool and seek more funding from the bank, or wait 6 months or 12 months and go at that point. But so there was a bit of back and forth there, but that was really the only kind of hold up or issue.
Are the pool and the garage included in your approvals? Like, how's that worked in terms of the staging of your approvals, and you're getting, completion certificates and all of those kinds of things? How's that been handled in terms of that approval process?
Yeah, so we officially applied for a 2-stage permit. So so the pool is in stage 2, but our understanding is it can be actioned at any time up until, I think, is it 10 years? It's at least 5 years that permit will stay valid for. So that cost us a marginal amount of extra money for the permits, but we thought that was absolutely worth it for peace of mind.
Yeah, and I think because it was definitely a not an if but a when, we then could work with the builder to say, well, let's do our best to try and ensure that we don't trip ourselves up between phases, and what can we do from a pool provisioning point of view to ensure that everything is in place, that the moment we do decide to trigger phase 2, we're not having to reverse or undo anything in the works. So actually quite a good portion of the pool is actually delivered in phase 1, because it's about just ensuring that we've got provision to press go. But then there are other things, obviously, that have a ripple effect. If we were to put the garage carport on, then we'd lose our access, so that needs to be phase 2 as well. And even things like there's a natural stone retaining wall that we're saying, well, let's hold off on that, because again, we need to be able to get around the back at the right time. So we're just now working out what is complete in terms of phase 1, and what are the elements that we can deliver versus what are the things that are smart to hold off on.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say about the process was our architect was also our interior designer. So, and I can't tell you how many times throughout this process where we've been just so glad that that's the case, because he was designing the house and thinking about the internals the entire way through, which actually meant that so were we, as a result. And so when we had that finalised, by the time we had the finalised contract, we actually also had all of a reasonably complete set of selections as well. And before the contract was signed, we had already gone and chosen all of our floorboards, chosen our carpet. We had a good idea about the kind of stone we wanted, and so it's made the build just still kind of busy, and still lots of decisions to make and fine tuning and all of that kind of stuff. But I can't even imagine if we hadn't done all of those big decisions first, how stressful and busy it would have been during that build process.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to touch on there. First, I mean, obviously the magic of bringing forward all those decisions, which we talk a lot about inside Home Method, and we've heard from other Home Method members talk about how valuable that's been, and that you can find it tricky because you're obviously making decisions a fair way ahead of time. And so there can be a human kind of, I suppose, a natural human tendency to think, oh, am I going to change my mind, or am I still going to like this in, 6 months' time, and all of that kind of stuff. But the value of that, because a custom construction project can require a lot of decision making throughout it. And so the more that you can free yourself up to make the decisions you can now, so that you're not maxed out bandwidth wise and making everything from a place of stress and reactivity during construction. And that collaborative process obviously has been facilitated by the fact that your architect has handled the interior design as well, and has then prompted you to make those decisions ahead of time and been able to document them all. So that's absolutely brilliant, and obviously then factors into how accurately the contract can be priced and what does need to go into provisional sums and PC items and those kinds of things. The other thing that I think you talked obviously about quite briefly, but I imagine that lots of listeners will be going, oh, hang on, that actually sounds like a really interesting process, is that staging that you talked about, and the decision making that was clearly driven by the power of having a collaborative team, and you being upfront about the fact that about how you were going to navigate your finances, what you were going to potentially park for later versus want to do now, and then the ability to access that advice from your team about, okay, well, if we're going to back out the pool, we also do need to potentially back out the garage so that we maintain the access, the retaining wall, but what are we bringing back in to stage one so that we don't have to do over, as you said, Zane, we don't have to redo anything. And so, oftentimes when you do put a pool in at a later stage, you've got to think then about, are there any services in a location that's going to conflict with? What do we need to do for our meter board to be able to incorporate pool lighting, pool pumps, all of the filtration systems? How are we going to make sure that we can physically get access down? Because if we're having to remove dirt in a very manual way, that's going to cost a fortune. And, all of those kinds of things become really important, and even just obviously the simplicity of the design, making sure that the design works for the inclusion of the pool, knowing that you're going to factor the pool in later. I'm curious whether, because you obviously that sounded like quite a dynamic decision in terms of where the prices were coming in for what you wanted the house, what you were going to split out versus what you were going to keep, how potentially you might need to delay it, whether it's that this builder finishes this contract, walks away and then comes back in 6 months or 12 months time to do, or whether they can just continue once they've completed this contract. And then also what that's meant from an approval point of view, so that you can, because a lot of people will run out of money and go, oh, rubbish, I can't actually afford, I'm going to slice this out. But then they realise their approval is totally linked to the completion of that item, and then they can't get their completion certificate, so they can't actually physically move into the home, or they move in illegally. Like, all of those things can become really problematic. So the fact that you were so working so collaboratively, completely upfront, obviously, and what you could afford or wanted to not put pressure on yourself about what there needed to be done. Like, how have you found that whole process has gone in terms of the power of your collaborative team and the power of you being informed and being able to be really communicative about that? How's that been for you, just as an exercise? Because I can imagine at the time it was probably should we, shouldn't we, might, and just feeling like really trying to make the right call for yourselves.
Yeah, I think it's it actually comes down to the team you choose. So we put a lot of work into who will our builder be, and we met 6 or 7, and at the same time, every time we met a builder, we'd ask, tell us your favourite architects, and vice versa. We meet architects, and I think in the end we had a combination, but even our architect and builder spent time on rapport, and I think it just pays off, because I think trust is everything, and trust comes down to us being really transparent about saying, this isn't a fake budget, this is the budget. And I remember sitting with the builder saying, I don't have 2 wallets, I don't have one here and then a secret one, this is budget. And it was just great to be able to be frank about that. And in the early days, the 3 of us, the 3 entities would come together and just talk about it, and we would literally make decisions and trade-offs and say, well, if I were to make this decision, what would it mean? And the architect would say, oh, it would mean this, this, and this. And naturally, he's talking to council and surveyors and permit holders, and then the builder's like, well, it actually also means this, this, and this. And it just, I think a really important ingredient is knowing what you're good at and what you're not. And we don't know the answer to a lot of these questions, so we could just put it to the team and say, what are the unintended consequences of this decision? And have that out at the table. And literally it would be our old dinner table that we would have that chat, and then make a measured call. So I think that once we then went into the genuine build, we meet with the builder weekly. But for example, this morning, there were certain decisions that were really important around, now that we have that plasterboard and we can know the light, we're trying to be a bit creative with color. So we just sort of said, okay, we've got this. We've also got grout choices and just things of low confidence for us that we said, actually, the architect will come to this one, and we're back together. And we actually did that as a 3-way conversation this morning. So I don't know. I think it went relatively well, but it all came down to trust and transparency on all parts. So, yeah, I think it's worked well.
The PAC process too, you know, the PAC process of having the architect and the builder and us in the room at the same time at every meeting just meant that the conversation always had every element of the conversation in the room at the same time. So if we had have been trying to make that pool decision with just the architect before we engaged the builder, there are a heap of things that we wouldn't have understood, and that the builder, when they were trying to quote stage 1 versus stage 2, there's a heap of information that they also wouldn't have understood. So it's, just having that PAC process in place from the very beginning just meant that we had the conversation once, and there wasn't any lost in translation between us having to reiterate all of that to the builder and missing elements and not knowing what they need to know versus, you know, so the PAC process was critical.
Can we talk a bit more about that? Because obviously you were still resolving the design last time we caught up, and I remember you were weighing up sort of inclusions of specific rooms and things like that. How did you find that PAC process went with sort of making informed decisions about, the design outcomes, about the cost, about juggling your budget, about the selections you were making? How did that sort of play out for you in that pre-construction process?
Yeah, well, beautifully. It was, all throughout that process, when the architect, because architects like beautiful things, and so do we, but our budget doesn't extend to all of the beautiful things. So, there were so many instances through that design phase where the architect would specify something or specify a particular design element, and the builder would say, yep, I can see what you're trying to do. How about we do it in this way? That will be a lot cheaper. It's easier in terms of buildability, and we like doing it this way for these reasons. And so then the architect would either say, yes, but, or actually, yes, I'm happy with that. And similarly with, with tapware and all of those kinds of things throughout, the architect would usually specify a very expensive brand and the builder would say, that's great. I have a contact that makes a brand that looks exactly the same, is equal in quality and is half the price. So there were so many of those instances where the conversation was just so organic in that way. It was a game changer.
Do you think too it helped the builder really get a handle on what was important to you design wise when there were things that you really wanted to make sure that you were incorporating and obviously that were part of your priorities for the project?
Yeah, I was going to say the builder's brief was actually, as an artifact, something we spent a long time on. It was actually the way that we went and spoke with each of our different potential partners. But that has actually been the artifact that's come forward every time we've had one of those fork in the road moments. And I think last time we spoke, we were debating whether we would build around a tree. And there's a lot of cost and complexity in building around a tree that we loved. We actually spoke to an arborist and found out it was dying. So we could have potentially made a really expensive decision to build around a tree that didn't have a very long lifespan. So kicking off from the top with a brief that outlines the way we want to live rather than prescribing the rooms we have to have was really valuable. And because this is a home that we will be in for a long time, I think resale probably wasn't a front of mind thought, but I would be lying if I said it wasn't part of the thinking. So we could even look at the area and say, okay, it would be a really wise thing if this on paper could look like a 5-bedroom house. But we know we will never use a 5-bedroom house. So we've now got a lounge that has a really discreet study nook. We've got a bed 4 that actually is a really beautiful study and workspace. We can't control whether everyone's forced to go back to work 5 days a week. And if we did, we've got multi-purpose rooms that we know we'll get use out of. And if we're told to entirely work from home again, then we know we can do that also, both at the same time. So I think probably our teams kept us honest to that brief as well, because when we get into the detail, they'll say, well, didn't you want to just live this way? And aren't we trying to foster socialization or whatever the principle was we had in mind? We can go, yeah, that's right. And we just sort of nearly use that as our principled way to get out of the weeds and actually decide what is it that we value most. So it's been really valuable.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, it's what that brief builder is designed to do, is really help you elicit from your own thinking what's going to be your biggest priorities and how you do really want to live in the future. And then through the thousands and thousands of decisions that you have to make, have a place to come back to that then enables you can always make a different decision, but it's important that you revisit where this whole thing started so that decision then is intentional. It's not just arbitrarily happening because you've kind of disappeared down a fork in the road. So I love that you'd chosen a team that helped keep you accountable to it, and that you had put so much in. I mean, I remember how much intention and effort you put into completing that brief builder, and also that it was done from a place of how you want to live rather than it just being about a real estate checklist of rooms and thinking about the home functionally rather than, and particularly how it was going to feel for you. Really having that as your anchor was just absolutely amazing. So kudos to you that you've been able to keep pulling that out and keep looking at it, and you've been able to work that way with your team. So can you tell me, you just touched on a couple of the rooms that you have. Can you just talk through what are you physically building? Like, how's the home ended up in terms of what's in it and the overall sort of size of it?
So we are retaining the front facade and the front 3 rooms of the house. So it's an old 103-year-old Californian bungalow. So those front areas are largely bedroom spaces, and I think the way that original bungalows were built, we had a kitchen right in the middle. So what we've been able to do is move that back, get that corridor, that hallway running front to back. We've stayed single level. We've got the land size, fortunately, to be able to go back and wider, and essentially what we've brought in is one view of the world would be 5 bedrooms, but it's actually 3 bedrooms. We've got a lounge. That lounge is separate to the living. So the living intention would be that's the light, bright spacious. That's where the family spends time. If you wanted to get away and listen to a record or watch a movie, there's a more moody lounge that has a little study nook, so that's multi-purpose. We didn't want a television, so we'll even just work with a projector in that space because that's the way we wanted it to feel. That actually joins on with the outside comes in because we've got an internal courtyard that comes in. So one of our hallways sort of turns into a bit of a garden, which is really nice. And off to the right, we'll have our lounge, and the northern facing wall of that is all glass that leads onto that same courtyard. On the other side of the courtyard, we've got our study, which will that's got an ensuite as part of that. And the reason we did that was because that is at the very back of the house. It would be a perfect place for traveling friends or grandparents or anyone to be able to stay, and that would be their room. But equally, there is external access from that study, so that if you're in the pool, you can run straight into that ensuite without running through the house. And so there's sort of a practical element to that as well. So it's the way we will live in it. It will be 3 bedrooms. We actually extended out our bedroom to nearly be like a parent's wing, which is nice. So we've got a retreat that comes off the back of our bedroom. That retreat leads into our master ensuite. So as you look at the house, the right-hand wing is ours, which is really nice. But I think a principle that we tried to pursue back to the brief builder was we wanted every room to be utilised. We don't like the idea of wastage, and it shouldn't be bigger than it needs to be. We want people to be able to have their space, particularly as the kids get older. It's important that they can retreat and feel like they have space and privacy, but equally, we don't want you to be able to hide in the home. I think it's important we can all actually connect with each other and getting that balance right. So all of that then sort of, I guess, the back area of the house is living, kitchen, which then sort of leads on to a scullery and laundry and a little mudroom with a side entrance. We didn't previously have a side entrance to the house, but we can now drive up the driveway, open the side, come in with your shopping and go straight into the pantry. So that's sort of the layout, and the rooms we've got available. There's a little powder room for guests. For some reason, I really love powder rooms. So we've kind of gone a bit fancier in there, and that feels like a nice place. Maybe that's the spot you just go and hide when there's a busy party and you just need to chill out for a bit. But yeah, that's the sort of basic layout of the home. And rather than a really contrasted, Cal Bungalow into modern expression, it's actually a pretty consistent style front to back, obviously just with modern appliances.
Awesome. Yeah, where's Zane? Oh, he's just hanging out in his powder room.
That's right. That's where you'll find me.
I know there's been other Home Method members who've loved the powder room just for the ability that it gives them to do something really fun that doesn't feel like a big aesthetic stamp on the rest of the house. So like there's been Home Method members that have put this really wacky wallpaper in, or, painted it a really different colour to the rest of the home and almost used it like this little place of experiment and enjoyment to just go wild in, knowing that it's just a small room that they can kind of pop into every so often, and it's not going to be this big aesthetic stamp over the rest of the house. So it's the powder rooms do get quite a lot of love from in lots of different ways, I think. So
we're just really excited by it. We love it. Doesn't feel, well, sometimes it feels laborious if it's 10:30 at night and we're reviewing a detailed SOW, but most of the time, we're really passionate about doing it well, and we're also pretty conscious that I think I said it before, we're a team, so we don't want to let the team down. We see how hard everyone else is working, and if they were to turn around and say by lunchtime Wednesday we need this answer, we take that pretty seriously because you're only as good as your weakest link. So we've been pretty committed, I think, to not letting the team down along the way.